Imagine looking up at a beautiful, serene stained glass window. You know the kind, right?
Oh, yeah. Just the classic picture of flawless virtue.
Exactly. You see a saint bathed in colorful light looking perfectly peaceful.
Maybe holding a scroll or giving a little blessing.
Right. There's just this expectation of absolute pristine holiness.
Like they're floating comfortably above all the messiness of the real world.
Yes, exactly. But then you step out of that quiet church and suddenly you are in the middle of a chaotic, dusty street brawl in the 5th century Roman Empire.
Wow. Quite the transition.
Right. There is shouting, intense political maneuvering, and like literal mob violence.
Yeah.
And the guy leading the charge, it's the exact same saint from the window.
Yeah, which is an incredible contradiction when you really look at it.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are unpacking a massive historical and theological paradox. We are exploring a fascinating and highly polarizing figure from late antiquity, St. Cyril of Alexandria.
And synthesizing the sources we have on him reveals a man of intense, almost unbelievable contradictions. I mean, we're looking at a very diverse stack of materials for this deep dive.
Yeah, we've got quite the variety today.
We really do. Our sources range from Pope Pius XII's 1944 encyclical, Orientalis Ecclesiae, to academic historical encyclopedia entries, some Franciscan media reflections, and even ancient Coptic Synaxarium records.
So a lot of different lenses to look through. And our mission today is to explore how a man universally known as the Pillar of Faith and the Seal of the Fathers, I mean, someone whose theology fundamentally shaped the core of Christian belief, was simultaneously involved in street brawls, political bribery, and orchestrating violent mobs.
It's a lot to reconcile.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. How exactly does someone end up with that specific resume?
Well, it begins with an education that perfectly and almost uniquely equipped him for the explosive environment of 5th century Alexandria. Cyril was born around 376 or 378 CE into a very influential Christian family. But the most pivotal detail of his early life is his uncle, Theophilus, who was the really powerful Patriarch of Alexandria.
So he had some major connections right from the start.
Oh, absolutely. Theophilus actively groomed his nephew for leadership, putting him through a staggeringly rigorous educational gauntlet. From a young age, Cyril mastered classical Greek grammar and rhetoric. He studied the great pagan philosophers and poets, Homer, Aristotle, Pythagoras.
Wait, I'm stuck on the fact that he read Homer and Aristotle. Weren't the early church leaders deeply suspicious of pagan philosophy?
Oh, they definitely were.
So how did he justify studying what many at the time considered the enemy's playbook?
Well, they were deeply suspicious, but they were also incredibly pragmatic. I mean, to defeat pagan arguments or to out-debate rival Christian factions who, used Greek logic, you had to understand their rhetorical weapons.
Ah, so it was like opposition research.
Exactly. Theophilus made sure Cyril had the sharpest intellectual sword possible. And uniquely for an Eastern bishop of his time, Cyril also acquired a working knowledge of Latin.
Which was rare.
Very rare. In the divided Roman Empire, where the East spoke Greek and the West spoke Latin, this was a massive strategic advantage.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it meant he could read Western theological commentaries and eventually communicate directly with the Bishop of Rome without relying entirely on translators.
Translators who might, alter his precise meaning.
Right, exactly. Control the language, control the message.
So after all that elite city education, the sources note he spent about 5 years in the harsh Natrian desert.
He did.
He lived as an ascetic monk under a spiritual guide named Sarabon. He memorized scripture, practiced intense physical fasting, and learned the traditions of the Desert Fathers.
It's a drastic shift in lifestyle.
It feels like a politician being sent to a spiritual boot camp, right? To learn ultimate humility before taking office.
That's a great way to put it.
But wait, if he spent 5 years meditating and fasting in the desert, how did he immediately get involved in a violent succession struggle, the absolute second his uncle died in 412 CE?
Yeah, the whiplash is real there. You have to look at the mechanics of the job he was stepping into. The Bishop of Alexandria was not merely a spiritual guide giving comforting sermons on Sundays.
Right, he wasn't just a local pastor.
Not at all. He was a massive civil administrator acting on the imperial stage. The Patriarch controlled unimaginable wealth, vast agricultural lands, and an enormous trade fleet.
Because Alexandria was huge for trade, right?
Exactly. It was a cornerstone of the Roman economy. It literally provided the grain that fed the empire. Plus, the city itself was a volatile cultural crucible.
Also,
It was a megacity boiling with ancient pagan philosophy, a huge Jewish diaspora, and deeply entrenched, often rival, Christian sects.
So holding on to that kind of power meant you couldn't be a passive, gentle shepherd. You had to have an incredibly heavy hand just to maintain order.
Imagine you step into a role where your highest spiritual ideals immediately and violently clash with cutthroat real-world politics.
Yeah, that's a tough spot.
The moment Theophilus died, a literal riot broke out in the streets of Alexandria between Cyril's supporters and the supporters of a rival candidate named Timotheus.
Wow.
Cyril won the bishopric, but that violent clash set the tone for his entire tenure. He did not waste a single second consolidating his power. He started by systematically targeting rival groups.
Which the sources mention. They say one of his very first acts was to pillage and shut down the churches of the Novatianist sect.
Yes.
What exactly was a Novatianist, and why did Cyril go after them first?
So, the Novatianists were a very strict, puritanical Christian sect. Decades earlier, during the fierce Roman persecutions, some Christians had renounced their faith to avoid execution.
To survive.
Right. And the Novatianists firmly believed that those lapsed Christians could never be forgiven or welcomed back into the church.
So they were hardliners.
Very much so. Mainstream Christianity, however, offered them absolution and readmission. Because the Novatianists operated independently and considered themselves the only pure church, they were a highly visible threat to Cyril's authority.
Ah, I get it. By shutting them down and seizing their sacred vessels, Cyril was sending a clear message.
Exactly. The message was, there is only one church in Alexandria, and I am its sole leader.
But that aggressive administrative style put him on a direct collision course with Orestes, right? The Roman prefect of Egypt.
Oh, major collision course. Orestes represented the emperor. And it's easy to see why a secular governor would be furious with a new bishop acting like an independent warlord.
Yeah, Cyril essentially became his own police force, completely bypassing Roman law.
The historical records detail this tragic cycle of escalating violence stemming from this exact power struggle. Tensions frequently flared over crowd disturbances at public spectacles, which eventually led to a faction of Jewish conspirators plotting a nighttime massacre of Christians.
Oh, wow. How did that happen?
They falsely cried out that a major church was on fire. When unarmed Christians rushed out into the dark streets to save the building, they were ambushed and slaughtered.
That is horrific. And rather than going to Orestes to demand justice through the Roman legal system, Cyril took matters into his own hands.
He absolutely did.
He led a massive Christian mob to seize the synagogues, expel the entire Jewish population from the city, and allow the mob to plunder their property.
Bypassing the civil authority entirely like that infuriated Orestes, the tension finally peaked when 500 of those ascetic monks from the Nitrian desert came down into the city.
Wait, let me stop you there. Why are ascetic desert monks acting as a violent paramilitary force for a city bishop? Aren't they supposed to be out in the wilderness praying?
You would think so, right? But these monks were fiercely loyal to the Patriarch who funded their monasteries and protected them. They viewed themselves as the literal soldiers of Christ.
Oh, I see.
Because they had renounced the world and embraced brutal physical hardships, they were completely fearless of Roman law or physical punishment. When they swarmed Orestes' chariots in the streets, a monk named Ammonius threw a stone that struck the Roman prefect in the head, severely wounding him.
You cannot just assassinate a Roman governor in the street.
No, you really can't. Orestes had Ammonius arrested, tortured, and executed under Roman law. Then, in a move that shows just how deep the political tribalism ran, Cyril tried to declare Ammonius a holy martyr of the church.
Wow.
Even the moderate Christians in Alexandria pushed back on that one. They pointed out that Ammonius did not die defending his faith.
He died because he assaulted a high-ranking government official.
Exactly. Cyril eventually let the martyrdom claim quietly fade. But this powder keg of a city eventually detonated in the year 415 CE, resulting in the tragedy of Hypatia.
Ah, Hypatia. She was a brilliant, highly respected Neoplatonic philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician, right?
Yes, and crucially, she was also a close friend and intellectual confidant of the prefect, Orestes.
We should probably define Neoplatonism here for the deep dive.
Right.
It was a philosophical school that sought the ultimate, unified source of all reality.
Right, a very elevated philosophy.
But to the uneducated fanatic factions in Alexandria, her complex philosophical teachings and her scientific instruments were just viewed as pagan magic.
Unfortunately, yes. Rumors started spreading that she was enchanting the prefect and preventing him from reconciling exactly with Cyril.
That's terrifying.
It was. In March of 415 CE, during the season of Lent, a Christian mob led by a lector named Peter ambushed Hypatia's carriage. They dragged her to the Caesareum, which was a former pagan temple that had been converted into a Christian church.
Oh, no.
And there, she was brutally murdered. The historical accounts detail that the mob used sharp roof tiles and pottery fragments to tear her flesh, after which they dismembered her and burned her mutilated body at a place called Cinaron.
It is such a chilling, horrific event, and it forces us to ask the hard question of our sources. How do the historical records reconcile a canonized saint and doctor of the Church with this level of mob violence?
Looking at the historiography impartially, we see a fierce debate that has lasted for centuries. The contemporary ecclesiastical historian Socrates Scholasticus wrote that this murder brought, quote, no small disgrace upon Cyril and the Alexandrian Church.
Did Socrates explicitly blame Cyril?
He doesn't explicitly state that Cyril ordered the shit, no. But he emphasizes that the violent atmosphere was cultivated directly by the Patriarch's aggressive policies.
Got it. What about other historians?
Later pagan historians, like Damascus, take a much harder line. They explicitly accused Cyril of orchestrating the murder out of professional jealousy and political calculation.
Okay, so a clear divide in the sources.
Very clear. But regardless of his direct involvement, the tragedy of Hypatia forever symbolizes the absolute extreme of religious and political sectarianism during his tenure.
And that absolute refusal to share power with secular authorities didn't just stop at the city limits of Alexandria.
No, it definitely did not.
Once Cyril had physical control of his city, he turned that exact same uncompromising aggression toward the intellectual landscape of the entire Roman Empire.
Yes.
He redirects his combative energy from street fights to a metaphysical battle that threatened to literally tear the Christian world apart.
Which brings us to the Nestorian controversy. In 428 CE, a Syrian monk named Nestorius was appointed Patriarch of Constantinople,
Which was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Right. And Nestorius began preaching a doctrine that caused an absolute theological earthquake. He targeted the traditional title given to the Virgin Mary, Theotokos, which translates to God-bearer or Mother of God.
Why did he target that specific title?
Nestorius argued that this title was technically impossible. A finite human creature, he reasoned, cannot give birth to the infinite, eternal, uncreated God.
Okay, so Nestorius suggested Mary should instead be called Christotokos, the Christ-bearer.
Exactly.
He proposed that Christ had two distinct, separate natures that functioned almost like a partnership. In his view, the eternal divine Logos merely inhabited the human body of Jesus.
Because Nestorius was trying to protect the philosophical concept that God is impassible, meaning God cannot suffer, change, or die. To solve the problem of Jesus dying on the cross, Nestorius separated the human Jesus, who suffered from the divine Logos, who remained perfectly detached and unharmed.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If I am understanding Nestorius correctly, is he basically saying Jesus was a regular guy walking around in a God suit?
A God suit. That is a highly effective analogy.
Like it's a mechanical partnership rather than a true organic fusion of God and man.
Yes, exactly. It was a moral union, two distinct subjects operating in tandem. When Cyril heard this in Alexandria, he recognized immediately that this was not just some academic debate about Greek prefixes.
Right, he saw the soteriological stakes. Why does this matter so much for everyday salvation?
So, soteriology is the study of religious salvation. Cyril argued that if God did not truly and personally become human, then humanity is not saved. Think of it as a bridge across an infinite chasm. If the person who died on the cross was merely a human partnered with God, then the sacrifice was only human. It wasn't God himself bridging the gap between heaven and earth.
That makes a lot of sense. So Cyril advocated for what becomes known as the hypostatic union.
Yes.
He used the phrase meaphysis, one incarnate nature of God the Word. He insisted that divinity and humanity are completely united in one single person. They are not confused or mixed together into a third thing, but they are absolutely inseparable.
And Cyril pointed to the Eucharist, the act of Holy Communion, as the ultimate proof of this concept. If Jesus was just a human operating in tandem with the divine, then eating his flesh in the Eucharist is mere cannibalism. It has no spiritual power.
Right.
Because of the hypostatic union, however, believers are consuming the life-giving flesh, the zoopuos of God himself. This flesh has the power to transform the believer because it is genuinely united to divinity.
So the stakes literally could not be higher for the people of late antiquity. It was about the physical mechanics of eternal life.
Absolutely. And knowing what was on the line, Cyril decided he needed to legally enshrine his theology at the highest possible level of the church. He utilized every ruthless political instinct he had honed on the streets of Alexandria to secure that victory.
This leads us to the Council of Ephesus in 431 CE.
It does.
The emperor, Theodosius II, calls a general council of the entire church to resolve the crisis. Now, travel in the ancient world was incredibly difficult, and coordinating hundreds of bishops across the Mediterranean was a logistical nightmare.
A huge nightmare.
But Cyril did not arrive unprepared. He came armed with the backing of Pope Celestine I of Rome and a document known as his 12 Anathemas.
Which was basically a list of strict theological condemnations that Nestorius was forced to accept.
Right. Now, the council was supposed to start on a specific date, but the Syrian bishops, led by Patriarch John of Antioch, who was sympathetic to Nestorius, were legitimately delayed on their journey.
Right, they were stuck traveling. And the Roman legates representing the Pope were also delayed. So Cyril saw an opportunity. He unilaterally opened the ecumenical council early. He just assumed the presidency of the council himself, claiming to act as the representative of the Roman Pope.
Wait, isn't starting the council early, before the primary opposition even arrives, a blatant procedural foul? He literally rigged the game.
Yeah, it was an absolutely audacious, massive power play. Nestorius realized the deck was completely stacked against him and refused to even attend the sessions.
Understandably.
So Cyril and his allied bishops simply judged Nestorius in absentia. They read Cyril's documents, declared Nestorius a heretic, and formally excommunicated and deposed him.
This threw the entire church into chaos. A few days later, John of Antioch finally arrived in Ephesus with his contingent of Syrian bishops. They saw what Cyril had done, and they set up their own rival council down the street.
Yeah, you can't make this up.
They read their own documents, declared Cyril a heretic, and deposed him. You now have two councils in the exact same city excommunicating each other.
And Emperor Theodosius II received these conflicting, furious reports back in Constantinople. Thoroughly confused and frustrated by the chaos, the emperor simply ordered the arrest of everyone involved.
Just locked them all up.
Yeah, both Cyril and Nestorius were thrown into prison under close guard.
The sources describing this prison period are incredibly cinematic. Even under house arrest, Cyril did not stop maneuvering. He tapped into the vast wealth of the Alexandrian church.
No.
He literally smuggled letters out of his confinement hidden inside hollow walking sticks to coordinate with his supporters back in the capital.
Which is brilliant and crazy. He orchestrated massive financial bribes to sway the influential officials and royal family members in the imperial court.
And the sheer scale of the wealth deployed was staggering, right?
Okay.
Like nearly bankrupting the Alexandrian church.
It was a huge gamble. Eventually, the delayed Roman papal legates arrived in Ephesus. They sided with Cyril, validating his early council. The emperor was finally convinced to accept Cyril's council as the legitimate one.
So Cyril was released from prison and returned to Alexandria in triumph, while Nestorius was permanently exiled to the remote Egyptian desert.
Yep.
It was an unbelievable political victory, but a victory achieved like that leaves deep fractures in the church. The Eastern bishops were furious and alienated.
Oh, for sure.
So how does a man known for zero compromises, a man who rigged a council and bribed an imperial court, finally learn diplomacy?
Well, he realized that to preserve the core of his theology, which was the true unity of Christ, he had to make peace with the moderate factions he had just defeated. In 433 CE, Cyril shocked his own extreme partisans by signing a document called the Form of Union with his old rival John of Antioch.
What did Cyril actually have to concede in that document?
He swallowed his pride and accepted John's specific language. He allowed the phrase two natures to be used to describe Christ as long as it was understood that those natures were perfectly united in one person.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It was. Cyril's more fanatical followers felt entirely betrayed. They thought he was watering down his strict mea physis theology. Cyril, however, proved he could put the actual unity of the church above his own personal theological vocabulary.
He realized the bigger picture.
He recognized that demanding perfect linguistic submission would destroy the very church he was trying to save.
Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever been in a heated argument, completely convinced you were right, but you realize that to save the relationship, you have to swallow your pride and compromise on the exact wording?
I've all been there.
You have to meet the other person halfway, even when it feels like a defeat. That is exactly the diplomatic maturity Cyril had to learn.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Cyril ensured his theology did not just stay trapped in high-level diplomatic letters between bishops. He wanted it to reach the everyday believer. So he oversaw the translation of the ancient Greek liturgy into the local language, Coptic.
This is known as the Liturgy of St. Cyril, or the Anaphora.
Yes. By revising and translating this anaphora, the central Eucharistic prayer of the Church, he turned these complex, abstract, metaphysical debates into accessible, repetitive worship for the Egyptian laity.
That's incredibly smart.
Every single time they attended church and took communion, the prayers they recited naturally reinforced the absolute unity of Christ and the life-giving nature of the Eucharist. He embedded his theology into the very cultural rhythm of Egypt.
And his legacy really reflects that monumental achievement. In 1882, Pope Leo III officially declared St. Cyril a doctor of the Church, cementing his status as one of the foundational teachers of the faith.
True.
Later, in 1944, Pope Pius XII wrote the encyclical Orientalis Ecclesiae, which specifically praised Cyril's ultimate spirit of reconciliation in 433 CE, urging separated Eastern Christians to emulate that same willingness to unite.
So what does this all mean? We started with the image of a serene, stained glass window. Behind that glass, we found a man who fought his way from the ascetic silence of the Nitrian desert through the bloody, rioting streets of Alexandria, all the way to smuggling secret letters and hollow walking sticks from a prison in Ephesus.
It's an epic life story.
He was impulsive, deeply aggressive, and politically ruthless. And yet he forged a theological doctrine of the Incarnation that has stabilized Christian belief for 15 centuries.
It is a genuinely profound paradox.
Which leaves us with an important, lingering question. History often demands pure heroes. We want the figures who shaped our world to be flawless from start to finish. But what does it mean for our understanding of truth if the survival of our most profound spiritual doctrines relied entirely on the ruthless, deeply flawed political tactics of a man like Cyril?
Wow.
Can divine truth be perfectly preserved by entirely imperfect hands?
That is certainly something to mull over. The next time you see a stained glass window, remember that the light shines through the cracks, the lead, and the jagged edges, just as brightly as it shines through the smooth glass. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the complexities of history, and we will catch you next time.